Hello, I am Joe Beal, the Autistic Publisher, and this is A People's Guide to Publishing. This is our host, Ruby Red, the service dog, who will help guide us through today's topic, which is how Amazon, and to a lesser degree, other global corporations, have diametrically changed publishing over the past, let's say, decade. So, we're going to look at this story through the lens of the zine series and now book, A Life and Times of Butch Dykes by Eloisa Aquino. And so our story begins roughly 2008, maybe 2009, when we were approached by the author to sell her self-published zine series, and which we did. And they were very popular. We were importing them from Canada, where she prints them. We were selling them and distributing them in the United States, where obviously the majority of our distribution reach lies. And we were also doing a certain amount of export, selling them to other countries around the world. Another important part of the story is that Microcosm fundamentally changed the approach of how we sold publications in 2012. We had begun working with a trade distributor for our own books that we publish, and we had taken a more, I guess you'd say, informed role into the publications that we distribute as a result of that. And so we came to understand that stores buy from a series of basic terms. They expect a certain 40% discount. They expect to be able to buy your titles through wholesalers when, rather than having to order directly through you each time. And, as a result, we accommodated those terms and, tried to fit industry standards whenever possible. We used to pay the self-publisher 30 days after they shipped to us, and we used to pay 50% of the cover price. But that was because we were primarily selling mail order to individuals. Around 2013, the major shift was that a majority of our sales were to retailers. So obviously we were selling larger quantities in most cases, but the pinch was really on us in the middle, And the odd thing is that distributors are really the scarcity here. There's a lot of people publishing. There's a lot of retailers. There's probably easily 20,000 different retailers in the United States that would potentially sell something resembling a book. Everything from like 7-Eleven to like a boutique to like a bookstore to, like a hardware store to any kind of a company that would touch a book. And so we had to go back to all the self-publishers and say, we can't give you 50% because that 10% from 40% to 50% isn't enough to cover our costs, to cover our bottom line, to cover our staff, to cover the work that goes into fulfilling the service. And also at that same time, the majority of distributors were going belly up. A lot of distributors weren't really monitoring their data, and so I couldn't even, I lost count of how many places went out of business, say between 2011 and 2016, or in some cases they merged with these big companies and or were rolled into them in one way or another. And so essentially the result of that was there was more and more demand for what we did, which is great because it's like you always want to be helpful and you don't want to be obsolete and all that. And so one major change was that essentially all of the shipping was then pushed back onto the publisher. So for the books that we publish, we had to pay not only the shipping to the distributor, but we had to pay the shipping from the distributor to the wholesaler or retailer. And that hadn't been that way prior. That was a very striking change for us. And then on the other end, for our distribution, we had to often pay the shipping to the store. And so, it's like either way we're sort of getting bit by that. So in some way or another we have to figure out a way to charge that back to the publisher, when we're doing the distribution. In the case of The Life and Times of Butch Dykes, it had gone from, I think we were selling them originally for $5 to, we brought the price up to $6 to help her compensate for that margin. And that's what a lot of publishers do, is they'll raise the price to sort of help pad those costs, because, she had to pay to print it, she had to pay to ship it to the United States, and and then we can only pay her a smaller percentage of that cover price. And so along the way, she said, I've been thinking about it and I would like to make a book. I feel like you could publish a good representation of this work as, and distribute it in the United States and around the world, and do a good job with that. And that's something I've been considering for some years. And so we scheduled that in when we did all the production work on the book and made the changes and made it essentially like a book worthy publication that didn't just look like a reprint of a series of zines. It really, I believe, serves as like a cool standalone representation of her work. And then a few months after that, she kind of came back to it and she's like, I did the math and I don't really think I can afford to send you zines anymore at these prices, because I would raise it to $7, but I just feel like that's too much. Like, we really shouldn't be charging $7 for this work, And the book, obviously, the book will be $19.95, and it contains, I think, something like 14 issues or something, so it's like at that point they're not going to spend the $80 on the zines, they're going to just buy the book, and the book is a nicer package, in some ways the zines feel a little more intimate and personal, obviously, but and so that's just in the span of 10 years. The book will come out this fall, 2019. It's fascinating that when I took the time to explain it to another staff person, that fundamentally all of this stuff really comes down to the fact that Amazon crunched all of these retailers, all of these wholesalers, all of these publishers to bend to their terms, and then that resulted in free freight more or less across the board, because then the major wholesalers were selling to customers with free freight and then billing that back to the publishers, in one form or another, and then we then had that same restraint where we would talk to a store and they would say, well, I get free freight from these other companies, why don't you offer free freight, and we had to go back and look at that and figure out a way to make that work. And in many small self-publishers cases, that is just not sustainable, or they haven't priced it in a way, or they're not they just don't have that much piece left in their margin sufficient to cover that. So and I feel like this is something where people always assume that the problem is that Amazon is putting brick and mortar out of business left and right, but actually the opposite is true, because brick and mortar is growing. There's more of them. There's more kinds of retailers selling books. There's actually more independent bookstores opening, and that has grown in the last 10 years. What's happening is the pinch is moving onto publishers to sort of subsidize those margins, and I think that is, sort of the most hidden part of what's going on in publishing, but is obscured to your average reader. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to try to make this a weekly feature, and we'll see what actually happens in reality. All right, have a good one.